Your book, Getting Schooled, you wrote it after teaching for 1 year. You were filling in for a teacher taking a leave of absence. And 14 years before that, you had taught at the very same school for 16 years. What kind of school is this?
A small, rural, regional high school of about 400 students.
In Vermont?
In Vermont, in northeastern Vermont, yes.
You left teaching for 14 years to focus on writing. Why did you want to fill in for a teacher for 1 year?
Well, mostly for economic reasons, frankly. My wife was in transition between jobs. We needed health insurance, so I was wanting to try teaching again.
Well, in that first chapter, you seem very anxious about returning to the classroom. You even have nightmares. What's the reason, do you think, for this dread?
There is the pressure that comes from being on in front of a group of people. Teaching is the only job I know of where you can work 7 days a week and get up at 4 o'clock every morning, which I did during that year, recorded in Getting Schooled, and still walk into the classroom feeling you're not as prepared as you'd like to be.
That's a lot of pressure.
Yes.
You returned to the same school after being gone for many years. What did you find had changed?
Certainly, digital technology played a much greater role than it had when I left in the mid-90s. I had to recognize, first of all, that technology had introduced different ways to beat the system. That students can take a picture of a makeup test on their cell phone and send it to the person who's going to take the test after them. But I also recognized the tool it was to help many students overcome disabilities, a tool that they had lacked before.
We've been discussing technology, and the technology even for preparing students for eventual childcare has changed, because I know a lot of parents will remember carrying an egg around in a basket as if that were their baby. And now what are kids using?
Well, at least when I was at the school, they were using a doll, a life-sized baby doll with a device in the body cavity of the doll that made certain sounds and simulated certain infant needs.
And you had some very hands-on experience with one of these baby dolls.
Indeed, I did. I had a student come to one of my classes. She was a 10th grader. She had been given one of these dolls by the simulated mother because that young lady was preparing for her prom. So a student came to my class with the doll and sat down with it, and in the middle of class it erupted with loud, squalling wails. She immediately picked up the doll and went out into the hall very fast. This was a very considerate student. So she went into the hall, and after a couple of minutes, I was involved in what I was teaching. One of the students in the back said, "Mr. Keizer, I think perhaps you should go out into the hallway." So I went out into the hallway and found this young woman frantically trying to stop this doll from wailing. And the sound of an infant wailing, we are programmed to respond to that sound. And so both of us, though we knew it was fake, I think were in a sense of high stress. There was a key at the back to deactivate the sound, but she could not make the key work. And when I looked at it, it appeared as though it had been twisted in the wrong direction so as to become dysfunctional. We could not get the doll to stop crying. And then I looked at the student and said, "I think we have to take out the batteries." And she was hesitant to do that because that might mess up the data that was being gathered for the student who'd been given the assignment, something that student perhaps should have thought of before handing off the doll. In any case, I pulled out the batteries, and suddenly we were left with what seemed like a deathly silence. We carried the simulation a step farther than what had been intended, because we both got to experience that terror of a parent all alone with something they're not equipped to handle, and sometimes desperate to turn it off by any means necessary, including means that are harmful to the baby. A thought that sent a deathly chill through me.
You had some very dark thoughts dealing with this electronic doll.
Yes, I did. Teaching will give you very dark thoughts, very beatific and exalted thoughts, but some dark thoughts as well, yes.
As your teaching progressed and finally ended that year, what were your feelings about leaving, knowing you weren't coming back?
I think I felt about leaving the way I hope I will feel at the end of my life. That I was very glad and fortunate to have done it, and I was even more glad and more fortunate to be going home.
And you learned some things from those students, too.
Absolutely. I learned it's never too late for people to make changes, and I learned to be very careful, although I'd always tried to be careful, about any disparaging put-downs of younger generations, any glib belief that somehow the world is going to hell in a handbasket. I encountered young people in whose hands the world would be in better shape than it is right now.
What's the best review you ever got of this book?
I got many good reviews in paper, but the best review I got came to me secondhand through my wife, who was working at the time with a nurse. And her husband was a teacher, and her husband happened to read my book, Getting Schooled. And he handed it to his wife and said, "Read this. This is what it's like."
So he had experienced the challenges as well as the very uplifting moments.
Yes, he had. And if my book could not speak to someone like him, then I'm not sure what its worth would be.
Well, throughout your entire writing career, you've been getting good reviews, and you've also been publishing poems, and now we can find a collection in one book called The World Pushes Back. That's a very provocative title. What does that mean to you, that title?
What it means to me is I'm trying to evoke that quality in the world and in society which pushes back on us, resists us, and in so doing serves as a check on our wishes. We can't just push a button and get what we want, but also affirms our sense of being alive by pushing back on us. A quality that I think maybe is lost if we dwell exclusively in virtual reality to the expense of actual reality. The poem that the book takes its title from is The World Pushes Back. "Lift me," says the suitcase, "and makes my hand magnetic with the ground. Pull me," says the starter rope, and pulls me yet again out of the mind's dark well. "Resist me," says your back, pressed against mine in the night, so firm it is, almost irresistible.
So you're dealing with real world experiences,
Yes.
Really getting your hands in the dirt there.
Yeah, sometimes literally in the poems.
What kind of themes do you deal with in your poetry?
Well, the main theme I deal with is the subject that the essayist Richard Rodriguez said was the one subject of all literature, which is what it feels like to be alive. And to parse that a little more, I deal with the themes of love in all its varieties, and work, and faith and doubt, and mortality, and history, including the dark side of history.
Well, the reader will find some real insight into not only what it feels like to be alive, but just the general human condition. Would you please read the poem The Neighbors for us?
Yes, with pleasure. When a man and woman built their house on the hill behind mine, thus ruining forever the satisfaction I took in seeing no house but mine in any direction, I felt cheated and bitter. I live at the foot of the hill, I thought, and any time they wish, they can peer into my yard. But they were peerless people, most times quiet as the trees they had not cut, their voices murmurs in the wind, their jackets flashing colored wings among the branches. The woman gave birth to a son who calls my name cycling down the road as though I were his long-lost friend. So I live at the foot of the hill, and any bitter man who would climb it, meaning my neighbor's harm, must first get past me.
That's really a beautiful, touching poem, starting with your preconceived notions that were negative against neighbors who were horning in on your territory, and then you softened your viewpoint once you saw the reality of who they were.
Yes, and I think, poems sometimes can help us express that turning that you're talking about, and at other times we experience that turning in the process of writing the poem.
You do write essays and other kinds of works, but what is satisfying to you about writing a poem? What can a poem do that other forms of writing just can't do?
Well, when you write a poem, you're engaged in a very primal and universal activity. Of all the genres of literature you might name, the short story, the essay, the novel, you can find cultures that do not have those forms. They do not even have written language, but I know of no culture now or in the past that doesn't have poetry. And poetry, I think human beings come closest to doing their version of what birds do when they sing. In a poem, you can use language to transcend language. You can express mixed emotions, and you can do those things in a brief space.
Spotlight is supported by the Glenn and Carol Pearsall Adirondack Foundation, dedicated to improving the quality of life for year-round residents of the Adirondack Park.